NCOPA is the movement of Ethiopian entrepreneurs and innovators. A network of daring entrepreneurs transforming the way we live, work, and play. An emerging hub with best-in-class facilities, built by the best-in-class. NCOPA is where culture meets creativity, where inspiration meets disruptive innovation, and where bold ideas and big dreams yield unique solutions. NCOPA is connecting Ethiopia to Africa and Africa to the world. We're learning and adapting fast. And you can join a growing community of founders, investors, and world builders reimagining the future. Together, let's embark on an adventure to start up, scale up, and shake up the African entrepreneurship ecosystem. NCOPA is for Ethiopian entrepreneurship at work.
Welcome, everyone. I want to welcome folks who joined on this Zoom call, and thanks to Gary, Joseph, and Fred for joining us on this call. The topic of this second panel session, we had another session a couple of, actually 4 weeks back, is talent at work. The first session was actually about policy at work. This time we're going to pivot and talk about talent because it's a big and large topic that we need to tackle head-on in Africa, and more specifically in Ethiopia. And we have amazing panelists here who really live and breathe, talent and the future of jobs and outsourcing, gigs, freelancing, digital. And so we're going to be using all these words today. Or I guess tonight, as I was saying at the outset, we're live here in Addis Ababa, in the heart of the city. It's an area called Kazanchis, which is, I call it the second downtown of Addis Ababa. It's a pretty vibrant area. And as you can see here behind me, we have a pretty full office with people walking across the room, dialing into destinations as far as San Francisco, etc. So very exciting times. I think this COVID era has actually taught us a bunch of things, Valerie. And so I want to also thank MMCY Tech, which is the office that's hosting us today. For each of these calls, for each of these panel sessions, we're shooting the session from a different location to kind of showcase, what Ethiopia is doing in terms of, again, the future of jobs, outsourcing, freelancing, startups, entrepreneurs. And so again, I really wanted to thank MMCY and maybe turn it over to Valerie to say a few words about MMCY and give us a bit of background in terms of what is the company doing and what you guys are up to also in the next few years.
Okay, thanks, Bernard. Hi, everyone. I'm Valerie, and I'm from MMCY Tech. I'm the Director of Outsourcing. So thank you for letting us host tonight. We're really excited to be here with everyone. And we're just really grateful for this opportunity and also everything that you've done at NCOPA and JCC for the tech industry in Ethiopia. It's been amazing. So yeah, we're very excited about what's happening. So MMCY Tech is an outsourcing company, and we're headquartered in New York, and then we have offices in Dubai, and then of course our Addis office, which is where we're coming from tonight. So we started about a decade ago, and we provide support for the Cvent platform, doing event registration builds. And then of course, because of Corona, we've expanded to provide support for virtual events as well. And besides that, we do level 1 tech support for companies all over the world. We do data entry, data cleansing, and software development. And most recently, we really expanded our work so that companies around the world who are trying to find dedicated resources or who are trying to build a remote team, they can do it in Ethiopia through us. So altogether, we have about 120 team members doing this, and we work for clients like McDonald's, Invesco, Meritz, Internova, and these big companies that are located in the US and Europe. So really, if there's anyone on this call who's interested in one of our services, or if you're interested in building your own remote team here in Ethiopia, you can contact us on our website at mmcytech.com. But really, we wanted to join tonight because we are always talking about how we think Ethiopia is the future. We think that in the next couple of years, Ethiopia will become the next tech outsourcing destination in the world for so many reasons. But one, first of all, because there is so many skilled young professionals here, like the graduates coming out of university these days are incredible. And second, because we've seen so much positive progress in Ethiopia, the transformation is happening quickly. There's great policies, there's a great movement in the tech BPO industry here. So we work with other outsourcing companies along with Copa and some of the other initiatives of JCC, and we're trying to build the industry here to be large, to create jobs here, to make a positive impact in the community, and also to just be very globally competitive. So yes, I think the future of jobs is bright here, and I think it's going to continue getting better over the next few years. So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Valerie. This is actually a good segue into, thanks for recognizing also the work that we've been doing with you guys in terms of, the FROG Task Force, freelancing, outsourcing, and gigs. So again, my name is Bernard Lorendo, Senior Advisor to the Commissioner at the Jobs Creation Commission. Just a few words about the JCC, the Jobs Creation Commission. We are an entity or an agency that reports directly into the Prime Minister's office. And these days, I like to say that we're in the business of flattening the curve, not that of COVID-19, but that of unemployment. We have, as you can imagine, a big challenge ahead of us, which is to create more than 2 million jobs per year. If you divide that in 12 months, you're at about 160,000. If you divide that further by 20 business days, you're at that, give or take 10,000 jobs per day. And so we have to really think about novel ways, novel approaches in terms of, creating opportunities for jobs. And that's why we really focus also on digital at the Jobs Creation Commission. And also we focus on working with the private sector. Hence why we're shooting today, again, this session from the private sector. And we've launched this large campaign. It's a PR campaign to really rebrand Ethiopia, but also Africa in general. So that, like Valerie said, people can understand that, there are movements here of entrepreneurs, there are startup ecosystems. People are working on things such as outsourcing. They're using, amazing algorithmic languages these days, Python and you name it. So that, people can really now also think of Africa as a destination for either their back office, middle office, front office type of processes. And so this PR campaign is to rebrand the country within and without. And so within, we also need to, and I think Fred, you'll be talking about this a little bit later, but we really need to also instill in our youth that confidence, right? So that they know that they can really grow and that they have also some demand outside of their borders. And so let's play maybe a video that kind of describes in a nutshell what Nkopa is about and what it could be, because it's also a movement that we're all a part of, and it's also really about what each and every one of us is doing, and this is how we can really define the movement. So let's look at a video here for a second.
Nkopa is the movement of Ethiopian entrepreneurs and innovators. A network of daring entrepreneurs transforming the way we live, work, and play. An emerging hub with best-in-class facilities, built by the best in class. NCOPA is where culture meets creativity, where inspiration meets disruptive innovation, and where bold ideas and big dreams yield unique solutions. NCOPA is connecting Ethiopia to Africa and Africa to the world. We're learning and adapting fast. And you can join a growing community of founders, investors, and world builders reimagining the future. Together, let's embark on an adventure to start up, scale up, and shake up the African entrepreneurship ecosystem. NCOPA is for Ethiopian entrepreneurship at work.
So we may have lost the volume there, but we'll be playing the video again later. But just in a nutshell, NCOPA is about Ethiopian entrepreneurship at work. It's about policy at work. It's about talent at work, and it's so many other things. We'll be playing the video again later. But I want to turn it over to Gary. Gary, who's the chair at Singularity University and a partner also at Charette. Gary, again, I want to really thank you for joining us here on this panel. Gary, can you give us maybe the broad picture? I know you talk a lot about really different countries around the world about how they should prepare themselves, right, for the future of jobs, the type of jobs that are coming ahead of us in the next 5 to 10 years, but also the ones that are existing today. And so can you give us maybe a quick background and an overview in terms of, what should we expect in the next few years?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, it's thanks for the invitation. I almost had the opportunity to visit in Ethiopia in Addis, and then you may have heard about this virus that came along, and it sort of got in the way of some of those plans. I think the event that was planned in Addis is hopefully going to happen sometime this summer, but it's a tremendous opportunity to talk about some of the things that we're seeing around the world and some of the ways that Ethiopia is putting all the pieces of the puzzle together to be able to build, especially entrepreneurial ecosystems. So just very briefly, I'm the chair for the future of work with Singularity University. I've got this consulting company, Charette, where we focus on initiatives with impact, which means everything from doing works for refugee youth in Amman, Jordan, to advising ministers of labor and education in countries from Brazil to Tunisia. And then we've got a small software company that's built from the knowledge of a book called What Color is Your Parachute? The World's Career Manual. So we kind of get a broad perspective as to how people go through these pivots in their lives, and then how to build the ecosystem so that people can basically find or create meaningful work, and how they can become entrepreneurs. So we knew before, it's fascinating that Bernard, we're talking about flattening the curve of unemployment, because I actually wrote a piece a year ago called The Great Reset. And what I said was, before this virus came along, we knew that the pace and the scale of change were really the biggest impacts on the worlds of work and the worlds of education. People were worrying about robots and software and that sort of thing, and globalization. And sure, these are influences, but really it's that the speed with which change is happening so rapidly and how big those changes are just dramatically increasing. And certainly the virus has shown, we all know what an exponential curve now looks like because of virus infection rates. So we knew a number of things. We knew that traditional jobs were increasingly becoming what my good friend John Hagel calls unbundled. That is, the old model, the old rules of jobs were essentially one person, one job, depending upon the economy, sort of a paycheck and that sort of thing. And increasingly that's shifting around the world to what I call a portfolio of work. Young people are coming out of college or vocational school or high school, and they might have a day job, but then they're also driving for Uber at night, or they're working on a startup with their friends, or there's a portfolio of activities, which is a rational hedge against the constantly changing world. And parents ask me all the time, why won't my kid get a real job? Well, it's a different world, and there will always be traditional jobs. It's just that increasingly there'll be these other use cases. So as work is becoming unbundled, what's required then is people need to have a different mindset. They need to be thinking differently about how they approach work. And they also need to have a different skill set. So the mindset needs to be about being a problem solver and somebody who can continually solve problems in a range of different situations. And the skill set, what ends up happening, if you think about it, sort of the skills that humans have and the demand for those skills have always been this sort of oscillating Venn diagram. There aren't a lot of people that make buggy whips anymore because we have these, we don't all ride horses as much. We drive these things called cars. And so there've been these changes in the past. It's just, again, the pace and the scale of change is what's so rapid. So what we're seeing is that there's a tremendous need for people to have a different mindset about how they can rapidly learn new skills. And I tend to talk about sort of 4 basic skills. We all need to become problem solvers. We need to be adaptive because nothing in life is certain but change. We need to be creative because that's what will keep us ahead of that robots and software. And we need to do it with empathy. That is, we need to care about a customer. We need to care about the needs of others. And these 4 skills, problem solvers who are adaptive, creative, and with empathy in English just happen to spell pace. But these are also the skill sets of an entrepreneur, as I'm sure both Fred and Joseph will be able to talk about. You have to be a problem solver. You got to solve a customer's problems. You're going to have to continually iterate and adapt because you probably don't understand the customer's problem initially, and eventually you'll understand it much better. You need to be a creative problem solver to make sure that you're actually solving something for the lived experience of your customers, and you need to empathize with the needs of your customers. So that sort of same pace skill set is true for entrepreneurs. And Bernard was talking about confidence. I talk about agency. That's basically what confidence is. It's the belief that you can do something, you can take an action, and there could be a positive outcome. And this is true whether you're trying to help train people to become gig workers, or you're trying to help encourage entrepreneurship. When you're trying to encourage entrepreneurship, and again, this is something both Fred and Joseph have deep experience with. Essentially, what ends up happening, though, is you have to have good ecosystems. What we've seen, we've been in this space for 20 years of impact and entrepreneurship, and we founded something called SOCAP, Social Capital Markets, back in 2008, which is the largest gathering of entrepreneurs that want to have an impact and investors on the planet. And basically, what you need is an ecosystem. That is, you need to have all the pieces. You got to be able to train people. You've got to have all the ways that people are being, developed and encouraged to have entrepreneurial thinking and have agency when they're young. You need to have good training so that entrepreneurs can build companies of consequence. You need to have the ecosystem of capital and other supports. There need to be markets. And so these are all tremendous opportunities in building the ecosystems that are necessary for countries to grow. And there are great examples around the world of countries that have done this. These are tractable problems. Like, these are things that you can solve. Less than 60 years ago, Singapore, the GDP was, the average GDP per person, the gross domestic product per person, was under $500. In Ethiopia today, it's about $1,000. It's a little less. But now Singapore has gone from 500 GDP to $65,000 per capita GDP in a blindingly short period of time. And so you can actually grow entire economies around these these processes that allow you to build these ecosystems and then be able to grow new industries as rapidly as possible. But there's a bunch of things that have to be there, like great internet access, like the kind of training and support that's needed to build great entrepreneurs. And then you need to make sure that you're actually growing all that in ways that are building the kinds of industries that you want. So I'll stop there, but these are some of the basic trends that we're seeing, and every single sign that you would want as an anchor for the economy, we see as being there in Ethiopia. It's both the pace and the scale, that we need to continually collaborate together to increase.
Yeah. No, so thanks for that. I like what you said around, those 4 traits that folks need to have in this day and age. And, interestingly enough, sometimes it's regions like the Silicon Valley that actually don't really are not really favored because, you know, you have legacy systems, you have people who've been there for decades. And here in Africa, in a country like Ethiopia, for instance, you know, we have a very youthful population, right? We have 70% of the population, which is close to 80 million, under the age of 30, right? So when you're talking about creativity, the thirst to learn, the thirst to also solve problems, I think we're kind of armed with those weapons here. We just need to kind of guide this youth, right, and kind of provide those skills to these entrepreneurs. And so I think it's a good segue to Fred, who is, I think, an expert in terms of what's going on in Africa specifically, and then we'll kind of zoom in, and then Youssef will tell us a little bit more about Ethiopia. But Fred, you're the chair of the African Leadership Group. Can you tell us a bit about, how do you see these skills that Gary was talking about, right? In the youth today in Africa, what do you think our fellow brothers and sisters in several countries in Africa need to do to be prepared to that flexibility and the amazing pace that Gary was talking about in terms of how jobs are changing?
Sure. Thank you, Bernard. I appreciate being on this conversation with everyone, talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is creating opportunity for Africa's talent. So, in the African Leadership Group, our mission is to develop future leaders for Africa, and we've set a goal of selecting, developing, and connecting 3 million young people in Africa to opportunities in the next decade, in the next 15 years. So, we have been thinking about these issues for a long time, about how do you select people with exceptional potential, very high performing talent, people with doses of courage, passion, and resilience and imagination, and then training them through our different programs, and then connecting them to networks that they need to become successful as entrepreneurs, as leaders, and also just as employees of organizations that need this high performing leadership talent. And last year during COVID, I think marked a really exciting opportunity for us as a continent, where of course there are many challenges with the COVID moment, where with all the economic downturn that we're going to see, and job losses and the recession that's going to happen for a while. However, one of the things I always believe is that constraints drives innovation. And Africa has always been a continent with a lot of constraints, so therefore there should be a lot of innovation. But so COVID is just one more innovation, one more constraint that's going to make us even more innovative. Because when you have a lot of constraints, you can't do things the conventional way. You have to reimagine and think differently. And so what we see as a huge opportunity is for Africa to begin to export its talent, but to export this talent without the brain drain. Because one thing that COVID made much more a reality is the possibilities for remote work. So we went through a strategic planning process as an African Leadership Group last year to really try and imagine what the world would look like post-COVID. And we, from our analysis and our thought process, ended up with a belief that there's sort of 3 big bets that Africa can make, or at least that we're making in terms of where we think that we can compete in talent. The first big bet is on technology, right? So we think there's a huge opportunity to train people in software engineering, data science, cybersecurity, UX, UI design, product managers. Salesforce.com even, they've shared with us that they're looking for about 4 million people to work in the ecosystem in the next 5 years. And the nice thing about technology is that these are jobs that can be done remotely, right? The angle that we're taking, though, is that we are trying to go into more sophisticated skills, not the least sophisticated skills, because that market has already been taken by India. So India and Philippines have kind of captured the market of very, very, the lowest end of the tech skills. So, testing, software testing, help desk support, etc. we don't believe that we should be trying to compete, because that's a race to the bottom. So what we are doing is rather trying to develop people who have more sophisticated skills, right? So not just a 3-month boot camp or a 6-month boot camp, but a 1 year to 2 year program where you're developing people with very deep skills in software engineering, but also going into advanced things like machine learning, AI, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, these kinds of emerging fields, cybersecurity, et cetera, where that we can then have this talent, data science, right? Because today Facebook and Google are paying a fresh college graduate out of Stanford $150,000 to do that work. So if we can, in Africa, the average college graduate gets paid $500 a month. So, someone who's being paid $10,000 a year in Africa is going to be really happy with that salary. But that's a massive saving for these global tech companies. And then also gives them access to scarce talent and also more diverse talent, which the world is looking for now. Right? So I think that's a huge, big bet. The second big bet we're making is on entrepreneurship. We believe that, because of in this moment, there aren't going to be very many jobs. So we need to have young people who are going to create their own jobs and to employ others. And then the third big bet we're making is on what we call the adaptable workforce, which is similar to what Gary was talking about, which is basically saying that aside from technology and entrepreneurship, we actually don't know what the jobs of the future are going to be. So therefore, what you need to do are create generalist problem solvers who have gotten critical thinking skills, leadership skills, the communication skills, collaboration skills. They know how to manage projects. They can analyze data and use it to make good decisions. And they're kind of like a very adaptable and agile. And therefore, they can learn new things quickly, just in time for when these new roles emerge. That kind of workforce we think can also be possible. So we're seeing, for example, we've got 2 graduates from the African Leadership University, one from Nigeria, one from Kenya, who did different degree programs in our Mauritius campus, and they've started a web design business. Where there are all these small mom and pop organizations in the US, like your local dentist that, or has like 5 employees, or the small law firm with, 4 or 5 lawyers, and all these, there's millions of these small and medium enterprises in the US, many of whom built their websites 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and they're completely out of date. They're full of viruses and everything, and they don't have money to hire a proper search, tech firm to design this thing. So these young women have started designing websites, and they're doing it, from their home base in Kenya, and their clients are in the US, they're getting paid a couple of $1,000s per website, and they're thriving, and they've got more business than they can handle, right? So one of the things we're very excited about Ethiopia, obviously, is that over 100 million people. The government over the last few years has made big investments in developing, science and technology, STEM education. So lots of graduates coming out with this basic skill set. And so we're excited about the opportunity to, upskill some of these graduates with, we're, for example, doing right now a full stack software engineering program that's open to Ethiopians that way. And we're seeing quite some good intake from there. And then we're going to add on these more advanced skills on top of that, as I mentioned, to really be able to then export that talent. One final thing I'll say is the enabling environment that is needed for this to happen. We're seeing a lot of interest from global companies, technology companies that want to partner with us to access our talent, but the infrastructure is needed, because without electricity, without internet access, all of this opportunity is not going to happen. And this is where the government really needs to step in to create this infrastructure. I can see India has 15 million people working in their technology industry today. We should be able to do 30 million in Africa, right? But it's not going to happen without the infrastructure. Aside from the internet access and electricity, what's also going to be necessary, people have to be able to go, even though there's going to be opportunities for a lot of remote work post-COVID, many of these global clients need specialized, dedicated, offshore development centers where they can be assured of the security of their data. And sometimes, when the talent goes, they have to leave their mobile phone at the door because they want to make sure that their data is going to be protected, etc. So that kind of infrastructure, if it's not built, then all of this opportunity won't happen. And that's where I think could be a real tragedy for the continent, because I think we have a unique competitive advantage, and now's the time to capture it.
Very good. Thanks, Fred. I want to come back to you because you said a bunch of very interesting things. I'll come back to you later, specifically around, how do we make sure that, because you said something important there that, we have to be in the business of kind of exporting the talent, but without the brain drain. But I'll come back to you later specifically on how do we make sure that, we export this talent, but within Africa, right? A lot of people sometimes when we think of, exporting the talent, we quickly think of the Western economies, but sometimes I think we lose sight of the actual demand that's within Africa. So I'll come back to you on that one. And I completely agree also, Fred, with you in terms of, I think we have to choose our battles, and we should definitely not engage in that race to the bottom. And, the good news here, for instance, in a country like Ethiopia, is that we do have those amazing skills. I mean, again, I'm here sitting at MMCY Tech. They have amazing talent. And the good news, again, on top of that, is that we have the talent in volumes, right? But it doesn't mean that just because we have this volume and all these amazing people that we shouldn't also look outside of our boundaries, right? And I think, Yosef, maybe it's a good segue to you in terms of, I know you talk a lot about, the benefits of immigration, right? And bringing also sometimes outside talent into a country so that you can actually accelerate the level at which you can learn new things, new tools, new languages, and if it's programming, for instance, or leadership skills, entrepreneurship, for instance. In Ethiopia, I think something that we suffer from is not really those technical skills, but more so the soft skills, right? Because of different reasons, the way people are raised, the way people are brought up in their families, some of those soft skills don't usually come across or come out as easily. And so, Yosef, I wanted to kind of turn it over to you. Yosef, you're the co-founder of the Edmund Hillary Fellowship. You're sitting now in, I think it's Auckland, right? Or are you somewhere else in New Zealand? Wellington?
Wellington, yeah.
Wellington, oh, there you go. So you're in Wellington, so pretty far away from us, but I know you know this continent very well, and of course your country, Ethiopia. Can you tell us a bit about, again, the future of jobs, but also from a lens of, how can we tap into this immigration and the talent that can come from without?
Thanks, Bernard, and pleasure to be here with you all. I actually agree with all the things that have been shared so far, so I don't want to repeat the same things. But just to give you a bit of context on what's happening here in New Zealand. So over the last 7 years, I've been working with the New Zealand government as a migrant myself, by the way, to figure out how to build a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem in the country. And I think this is a question that a lot of other countries come to, and Ethiopia and many African countries are really thinking about how do you actually create an ecosystem that is got a life of its own, that attracts talent, that retains talent, and your productivity level keeps increasing over time without a lot of external interventions. And one of the gaps that we identified is a global connectivity. So a country like New Zealand is exporting to the world. So building an environment where you're actually deeply connected with the world. And I know countries have embassies and consulates all over the world, but actually some of the best diplomats for a country are people that of your own country who are in other places, and also people from other places that are in your country, for economic diplomacy, for cultural diplomacy, and people who are actually ahead of the curve of what are understanding what are the bigger patterns that are actually going to influence you. And there's a gap of capital to invest in startups and innovations. And so what we built is quite a unique immigration program to attract the best and brightest talented people from all over the world to New Zealand, but doing is so with the lens of global citizenship. So actually, people can spend a bunch of time here, but also a bunch of time in other places. You're not going to this lens of you got to be in one place or the other place. It's in such a globally connected environment. Bridge builders with other worlds was a critical part. And it's really fascinating in such a short period of time, the amount of impact such a network has made in a country. And that gives me quite a bit of hope that actually other countries can leverage the power of immigration to really boost the growth of entrepreneurial ecosystems. So kind of like coming back to Ethiopia now, if you're trying to create a lot of jobs, the highest leverage area of investment is actually investing in entrepreneurs. If you guys are trying to create 2 million jobs a year, if you got to think in multiple years. So let's look at the next 10 years. How do you actually reach that point? Because trying to achieve these things right here, right now, is just, you're going to cut a lot of corners that is actually not going to help you long term. And if you start thinking in 10-year timeframes, then the best area to invest in is actually entrepreneurs who are going to build companies, nonprofits, different types of organizations that are going to create a lot more rippling effects. So think about, how do you get tens of thousands of entrepreneurs in Ethiopia who are going to create companies, who are going to create innovations to attract more talent and to help develop talent? So that would be sort of the high leverage way for you guys to get to that point in a way that's actually going to have a lasting impact for the country. The second bit is whenever you're building an entrepreneurial ecosystem, basically entrepreneurs who have been successful in the past are most valuable to helping create vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystems. And when you're starting from a nascent space, then you got to import. There's no entrepreneurial ecosystem in the world that has been successful without importing talent. We all sing praises about Silicon Valley, but more than 40% of companies in Silicon Valley were founded by migrants. So you really got to think about how you leverage global talent. Now, there's a question here as well, who's our ultimate market? And one thing that I see in Ethiopia and other African countries is, we tend to look at Western economies or Asian economies as our ultimate target. But in fact, you have 1.2 billion people in Africa whose economies you understand better than, say, someone in London or someone in the US. You understand a lot of the challenges that happen there. And so you actually have an unfair advantage more than anywhere else to actually understand the needs of a lot of those markets. So how do you actually look at your own continent as opposed to always focusing outward? There's a lot more innovations, a lot more capital flowing around. And I think you can leverage so much of that. The last thing I'd say about technology, it's been shared a lot here. But what's happening right now with learning is we're moving to a much more self-learning environment. And when I talk to young people from Ethiopia, a lot of people are smart. People are smarter than when I was growing up in Ethiopia, and then many of the generations that we have right now. What smart means is people have access to information. People have access to everything that you and I have access to, and people are absorbing a lot of this. So you actually have to step out from the old school hand-holding approach of education, but think about education as actually providing core infrastructures that lets people do a self-driven approach to their own learning and development. It's amazing to see the work that African Leadership Group is doing in developing tech talent, and there's also ways for people to learn coding and learn development on their own at home if they have some of the core infrastructure like internet and electricity. And so just thinking about, what are the high leverage areas of investment that you're going to have, 10x, 100x of your time and energy. How do you build some of those infrastructures? Yesterday, I was talking to the founder of Giga, who's trying to connect every school in the world with internet and make schools actually the hubs And they're working with a bunch of countries in Africa. They're not working with Ethiopia, so I think you guys should work with them about actually building that infrastructure there. And in technology, one of the biggest waves that I see is really what's happening with the blockchain phenomenon. Now, there are different levels of understanding of what's happening here, but it's basically the recreation of the internet in a much more distributed way, distributed fashion. And I really want to plant this seed because it's one of the areas that is actually made for countries like Ethiopia, it is made for continents like Africa, where it's inherently decentralized, it's inherently distributed. And if an ecosystem like the one in Ethiopia gets ahead of that curve, both government as well as the talent, you can create a lot of economic abundance much faster than you would in traditional terms, and create a space where, you know, an Ethiopian entrepreneur, be it in Addis Ababa or any part of the country, can have the same level of economic opportunity and access as anyone else anywhere in the world. And it doesn't matter what your name is, doesn't matter where you come from, what your age is, what color skin you have, you're playing within the same playing field as everyone else. And I think that's very transformative. On the other side, though, we talk a lot about technology. The other area of job creation is actually in the environmental space. And when I say the environmental space, it's not just from a do good for the world space, but actually ensuring the resilience of Ethiopia and Africa as a continent in our ability to have natural resources, to have biodiversity, to have clean air. If you don't have clean air, you're not gonna keep top talent to be there. There are a lot of people who are coming to New Zealand from, you know, Hong Kong, Singapore, US, so many places, because there's not clean air in those environments. They find cleaner air in New Zealand. So New Zealand is capturing talent because of its environment. And so if you guys want to keep talent long-term, there's attracting and creating talent, but there's retention of talent. You got to create an environment where people actually want to live. And, you know, reforestation of Ethiopia is going to take millions of people. How do you actually invest in those areas that's going to create lasting value for the country, as opposed to just creating lasting value for other countries?
Thanks for that, Yosef. I mean, you give us a lot to think about there, and I'm pretty sure my colleagues here are jotting down some notes. By the way, I have an army of folks here in front of me, very talented people that I want to thank here, who are really helping in terms of making sure that this session is a successful one. And we've had some critics, by the way, about the fact that we've all men here on this session. But believe me, in this room, they're all women, and you'll see more women actually in the next panels. You know, Yosef, you talked about attracting talent, you talked about retaining the talent. I think that's also something that we're jotting down notes on, because the first session actually for this panel series was on the innovative businesses and startups proclamation. And so hopefully this is a piece of legislation, a monumental one, by the way, that I think, unfortunately, the media hasn't paid attention enough yet. I hope they will. But it's going to be a monumental piece of legislation that's going to change the face of entrepreneurship here in Ethiopia. And one thing that we'll be working on, hopefully in the next few months, is, again, how do we also craft some of these, you know, startup visas, freelancer visas, etc., into the mix. You know, for me, sometimes what keeps me awake at night, and I was having a conversation the other day with the founder of one of the largest incubator here in Ethiopia, and we were agreeing on the fact that, you know, we have all these interventions to build a startup ecosystem, entrepreneurs, leaders, etc. But when you look at Gary, right, when you look at a city like San Francisco these days, we think that, and we know that it's a city, sometimes we joke around saying that it's a city run by a bunch of young people, a bunch of kids. But, you know, these kids built this ecosystem on foundations, right? So they were institutions. I always say actually that, you know, the Silicon Valley, the heart of it may be there in the Bay Area. but then the lungs are somewhere between Wall Street and the Oracle of Omaha, right? And you need the access to capital. You need so many things here in this to make an ecosystem work, so many ingredients. But again, the most important thing though is to build lasting institutions. Some of these band-aid solutions are not so sustainable. And so Gary, when you work with some of these emerging economies around the world, how do you approach this topic of, not the 70% that are under the age of 30, but the 30% that are above the age of 30? How do you also make sure that they stay plugged in, right? So that they speak the language of entrepreneurship, startups, because they're kind of the ones who are leading these institutions, maneuvering these institutions. And so if we lose sight of these people, it's going to be really hard to actually build an ecosystem of entrepreneurs, leaders, and technology people who are going to thrive, right? So I just wanted to see if you could share some thoughts there, Gary, on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so first off, maybe one way to think about this. I mean, we throw some stuff. It turns out, I just want to make sure for people listening, we're sort of defining some of this stuff. When I talk about ecosystems, you think of it just like in a rainforest. You think of all the different elements and sort of layers, and the ways that all those things sort of play together. And there's, in market systems, there are ecosystems. And so there's sort of dominant players, and then there's contributory players. And so when you're trying to encourage these ecosystems, what I often suggest to people is think of the word optimization. Like what you're trying to do is optimize. You don't have all the pieces when you're trying to start or grow these ecosystems. Silicon Valley didn't used to. It used to literally just be orange groves. Like there wasn't much of anything there. And so if you think of it, like there's all these pieces and they kind of all need to work together, but you're going to start off with some great assets. You have these young people, they're tremendously engaged. And then you've got an older population. You don't want to leave them behind either. You want them to be part of this. And so part of it is to be thinking about how you optimize for that. And one of the ways you're trying to encourage, you're trying to put the pedal of the car down, you're trying to press the accelerator so that these certain parts of it grow. So when you're talking about engaging, specifically to answer your question, keeping an older population engaged, first off, I want to make sure, when we're talking about these ecosystems, we're not just talking about building the next Google or Facebook. Like that is one element of what you want to do, but you're actually trying to build entire markets. Like you're trying to build these the kind of economy that you want. And if in 50 years we look back to this point and we see what kind of economy and Ethiopia, will have at that point, then hopefully all of these elements we're talking about will all be extremely well optimized by then. And then we'll be using Ethiopia as an example for other countries that want to try to play catch up because it leapfrogged so much. Silicon Valley is not perfect. It just has been the most optimized ecosystem for quite some time. And it's only been in the past 10 years that it's become clear that we've sort of gone too much into it's a very expensive place to live. There's lots of other entrepreneurial ecosystems around the world that we actually want to be able to catalyze. So a couple quick learnings from other places, and then I'd love to hear again from Ben Yosef. So a couple of the insights. So first off, it's really important everybody's sort of seeing the picture. Like we actually literally map ecosystems. We show people pictures. Like here's where we are. Yosef was mentioning capital. Like you've got to have all the pieces of capital, or else what you do is companies start up and then they don't go anywhere. You've got to look at industries. You've got to look at the kinds of things that you're trying to encourage. When Yosef was talking about, for instance, the environment and reforestation, think of those as business opportunities. Like those are places you can go to encourage the ecosystem to develop, because those are the places you think that you're going to have tremendous growth opportunities. It's important to be continually thinking about how you are helping people to understand, send the market signals about where the opportunities are. As you see economies grow, what ends up happening is there are big gaps, and that's where entrepreneurs step in. Now, the gap might be you need a corner grocery store. That's an entrepreneur. But it also might mean that you need a new cloud service provider, right? That there's a really big part, or there's some big part of the ecosystem that needs to be filled in that an entrepreneur can step into, and that can scale very quickly because the economy overall is scaling. So it's important for older people to realize the same kinds of opportunities exist. The linchpin is mindset. Carol Dweck has wrote a famous book called Mindset, where she talks about an older person tends to have a fixed mindset, and a younger person, of which Ethiopia has quite a few, tends to have a growth mindset. And as you get older, you kind of become more and more sort of that fixed mindset. And so you need to do entrepreneurial training, as Fred does. You need to be able to help them to see the market opportunities. You need to give them access to capital. You need to give them access to networks so that they can actually build these opportunities. And then, as Joseph was saying, you also need to keep bringing people in, that talent in from the outside. Now, one last point, and then I'll shut up. There are countries that have done this really well, and New Zealand's a great example. Singapore is another great example, where they have a whole bunch of laws that make it easier to start companies. They can start them faster. There's capital that's available. They send all the market signals saying, here's the kinds of things we really need here. And they have the portfolio essentially of trying to attract that talent. A country that's had challenges with this is Chile. They used to offer $30,000 to $40,000 to entrepreneurs who would bring the core team down for 6 months. But what happened was those teams would think about the new product or service they wanted to create, and then they'd go back home. They wouldn't stay and benefit the local economy. So as Ethiopia, as we think about how to build those talent attractors, it has to be where you're actually infusing them, helping them to infuse into the culture, so that they are actually creating the kinds of solutions that that economy needs, and not just, sort of parachuting in and parachuting out.
And I think, in Ethiopia here, we're trying to do the right things. We're building a bunch of parks and all kinds of resorts and all that. So hopefully you guys will come here. And a quick plug, actually, for we have a summit coming up in the next few months, and we'll call it the INCOPA Summit. So make sure you make your way to Addis Ababa in the next few months when those COVID travel restrictions kind of come down. I want to encourage, by the way, the audience to put in the chat box any questions they may have or comments, and maybe also mention who you want to address the question to. But I want to go back now to Fred, right? How is the African Leadership Group, right? Or maybe just in general, how do you see us Africans really connect the dots between the different ecosystems and the different companies? How do we make sure that someone in Bahrdar, right, in the north of Ethiopia, is indeed connected, but then connected to not just Addis Ababa, but to Lagos, Nigeria, and that they can export their talent? Because we see some companies, I'm not going to name names here, but get into the freelancing business, and they usually cater to New York and San Francisco and whatnot. But what ends up happening is that you kind of have an artificial inflation of their salaries. And so then they basically cannot cater anymore to the geographies within Africa, right? So how do we make sure that the talent can do both, right? Export their skills to the Western world, but also more specifically to Africa, so that it's much more sustainable?
So I actually think that, what's needed is an approach of both. If I think about within the African Leadership Group, we have three main parts. One is the African Leadership Academy, one is the African Leadership University, and the third is something called ALX. ALA and ALU are ALA is based in South Africa, ALU is based in Mauritius and Rwanda. And those have historically been primarily organizations that are very physically based. You have to go to a physical campus at ALU and stay there for 2 years and so forth. So, post-pandemic, it's hard to kind of make those work with remote talent. But ALX, from inception, was designed to be much more digitized. And so, it's a lot of, so for example, the software engineering program that we're doing is completely self-taught. Students teach themselves coding, and they leverage technology and peer groups and so forth. So it's a lot more scalable and a lot more accessible. And so we as an organization therefore can have our staff all over the world and all over Africa. So we made a decision that after COVID, we're not actually going to have any in-person staff. We're completely global. And so our teams are all over Africa and all over the world, right? We want 75% of them to be from Africa and Middle East. And then we are open to people from the rest of the world for the other 30%. So just like we are doing as an organization, I think many other African companies now are going to be hiring people from all across Africa to work for them remotely, right? So, market number one is obviously Africa, but that market is limited, right? African economies are not the fastest growing in the world, and the population that is growing much faster than we are creating jobs. Entrepreneurship is obviously going to be a key thing to catalyze that, but we can't wait for Africa to have enough jobs before we create opportunities for our talent. So we need to place them wherever they'll go. If you want, Zimbabwe wants some talent, we must export an Ethiopian there. Nigeria wants someone, so you'll have people working all across Africa with each other, but they must also work remotely. Ultimately, talent will go where the market is, right? And historically, they've had to, do very risky things, and some might have tried to risk their lives trying to go through, the Mediterranean Sea and try and get to Europe, and that's how desperate talent is to get to opportunity, right? So today you don't have to do that. You can just get access to the internet and you can work for someone, right? And so I think we've got to look at it at both. And the nice thing about this is that it'll actually make African talent more affordable, because you're not going to have just this one market of everyone having to work remotely.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. I mean, Fred, we definitely need to fight the battle on both fronts, both within Africa and outside of it, to tap into the opportunities. I think it was Germany who was issuing some of those numbers lately, and that they have this massive gap. And it's not the only country in Europe in terms of talent. I think it was, I'm forgetting now the specific skill, maybe it was AI or another type of skill in general, but it's in the thousands that they have gaps. So we definitely need also to help fill those gaps. Joseph, there's a question, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you were talking about attracting talent and retaining the talent. So there was a question though about, first of all, I think the gentleman or the lady, I couldn't really look at the name, but they were surprised that Ethiopia was awake at night after 9 p.m. But we do export our talent after 9 p.m. here, so don't be surprised. But Joseph, how do we make sure that we attract not only the talent but also investment? Right? What would be the lessons learned from New Zealand? Because that's the other thing, right? Because some of these institutions have not really taken off just yet. In terms of the banks, they have really limited amount of products that they serve. Same thing with the insurance companies and so on and so forth. Right? And so while this industry is kind of slowly taking off, how do we make sure that we also attract talent from maybe within Africa, but also outside of Africa?
Yeah, there are different angles to that. I think at a basic level, what we see is having government policies that protect investors and investment rights. That's a fundamental core. If you don't have that, then it's really hard to work with external investors. I can speak mostly from the startup innovation ecosystem, because that's the space that I'm most familiar with. Our belief here, and I think it applies for other places, is great capital follows great talent. So the investment is actually a secondary layer. It's a critical, important layer, but investors go where great entrepreneurs are. And so if you actually build a strong enough ecosystem that has great entrepreneurs, then you're more able to attract great investors. The other bit is, as I mentioned around blockchain and a lot of innovation that are happening in crypto space, that is fundamentally changing the investment landscape, how people can raise capital, how they can deploy it, and in a very decentralized, distributed way. So I'd really look at what's happening in that space. It's still very early, still very emergent, but I think that's a space to really think about. One of the tricks with international capital, and we see it in New Zealand and I see it in Ethiopia, is how do you get investors and people who are actually interested in the long-term success of your country? If it is a very transactional relationship, then most likely the country might end up losing long-term in terms of the overall value. So for us, is actually, we haven't been attracting money, we've been attracting great people to have a long-term vested interest in the success of the country. When you have that, then you're more likely to actually leverage that talent long-term. And when I think about the situation in Ethiopia, one thing that I mentioned early is, when you think about global talent for Ethiopia, one of the most untapped resources is the Ethiopian diaspora. You have millions of Ethiopians living all over the world. And that's actually a pool of talent for you to tap from, a pool of capital, a pool of networks. You have Ethiopians pretty much in every country of the world. So you have people who understand a lot of markets, a lot of environments. So think about that as another, pool to leverage as you're thinking about building that global connectivity and access to capital.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I mean, especially we Ethiopians, we have diaspora really scattered all across the world. I mean, last time I learned that there was an Ethiopian restaurant, I think it was in Iceland. So we definitely have a massive, community spread across the world. But so Fred, I wanted to come back to you because, again, for me, one thing that's gonna keep me awake at night as well tonight is, how do we make sure that not just the less than 30 years old, but the more than 30 years old, so those executives that also Gary was alluding to, how do we make sure that we arm them with those skills of entrepreneurship, or at least the curiosity, right? Is there anything that the African Leadership Group is doing to that respect? And also, it goes back to the question of access to capital, right, and attracting capital. If those executives are not speaking that language, right, of investment, VC. I mean, I used to work at BNP Paribas in the heart of the Silicon Valley, and BNP Paribas had a incubator / accelerator, as a matter of fact, within its premises, right? And then you look at other bigger firms like that, and they may have even like a corporate venture capital, right? And that's how you kind of slowly have an ecosystem that thrives, that invests in these ventures, in these entrepreneurs, but also that they're able to even adopt these services, because that's one thing that we see now in some of these entrepreneurship ecosystem and staying on that topic of the future of jobs. You have entrepreneurs who are creating jobs, but most of their ventures are B2C. They haven't been able to really penetrate the corporate world, right? So what is it that we can do in terms of, again, guiding that vote for the future of jobs, so that the executives also, right, the corporate entities are on that vote?
I think the question you're raising is, how do you create the ecosystem to support entrepreneurship in Africa? And I think you need multiple things to come together for that, beyond just, companies and executives who fund startups. So, first of all, of course, you need the talent. You need people with big ideas who have the traits of resilience and passion and imagination, the things that will allow you to get started as an entrepreneur, but more importantly, allow you to stick with it, right? Because entrepreneurship is a hard thing, and many young people can't really, don't have the resilience to keep going when things don't work out. So it's about getting young people in Africa, firstly, to dream not to get a job, but to dream to become an entrepreneur, right? And showing them role models of people who are doing this, and really defining entrepreneurship not as something that you do when you don't get a job, but entrepreneurship should be your career, right? And that's one of the things that we've been doing at the African Leadership Academy with the Anzisha Prize, which is really trying to get young people to see entrepreneurship as their career, right? You create a job and you create jobs for other people. One of the things we found, for example, is that the average entrepreneur, and we've been working with young entrepreneurs in that program. We've taken about 300 people through in the last decade, and we did research recently to analyze the impact, and we found that the average young entrepreneur, we work with entrepreneurs between 14 and 23, right? Young entrepreneurs who are starting companies. The average entrepreneur has created 18 jobs each, right? And they tend to hire peers. So they hire other young people compared to more mature people who hire older people. So if you create young entrepreneurs, they hire young people. They basically absorb all the youth or their peers, right, into their companies. So it's a really powerful multiplier effect. And we need to think about how do we build out that system. What I believe we need in Africa is not just the Silicon Valley kind of entrepreneurship, where, if you haven't started a company and sold it within 1 year for $1 billion, then you failed. They have this whole notion of the unicorn. Everyone wants to be a unicorn. And what we need in Africa are probably more like camels, right? They are sturdy. They can go for a long time. They don't need a lot of cash, right? They have water to survive, right? And they survive based on revenues that generate from customers, not from constantly needing capital to fund their growth, right? And if you look at China, for example, something like 60% of their GDP comes from 30 million SMEs that they have, who have 10, 20, 50, 100 employees. I think we need to build that picture of entrepreneurship in Africa, right? And then that, from some small fraction of them will become the big unicorns and go public and everything. But we need this huge base of small entrepreneurs, right? Who are employing 50, 100, 200, doing simple things, right? And that for me is where you start. So you've got to find people. You've got to redefine what entrepreneurship looks like. We have to then build an ecosystem of networks, right? Because no matter how good your skills are, if you don't have access to the right networks, someone who can mentor you, who can invest in you, who can, partner with you, open doors to help you get your first customer, you won't go anywhere. So a few things we're doing in that regard is we've created something called The Room, which is an ecosystem of very influential people that we're bringing together from all around the world to connect the next generation of entrepreneurs to these people, right? So The Room is a community where young entrepreneurs can belong to, and then it's connecting them to mentors, to investors, to partners and people who can, and we're also continue to develop their own skills, and we're connecting them with talent as they become, as entrepreneurs grow, because one of the biggest challenges that entrepreneurs face, they need to find great talent themselves, right? So, and in that room, we are going to be crowdsourcing funding from the more mature members of the room, CEOs, investors from around the world, who can invest in the talent that we're producing, as well as partner with venture capital funds from Africa and around the world who are looking for the best talent to invest in. And finally, we recently partnered with this organization in Israel called Startup Nation Central. I know they're doing some stuff in New Zealand as well. And we have the exclusive license to bring their model, which is what they've been doing in Israel. Now, Israel has the highest per capita for startups in the highest number of startups per capita in the world, right? And so we are going to be working with them to bring that, what they've done in Israel in terms of trying to create the ecosystem for entrepreneurship to Africa, and curating some of the best startups in Africa onto this platform called Startup Nation Finder, where investors and partners who are looking for the best entrepreneurs in Africa can go to this platform and find them, and then either invest in them or help them in other ways, or corporate partners who are looking for strategic partnerships can find these organizations and so forth. So there's a whole ecosystem that needs to come to play, and it's not enough just to train people, right? It's not enough just to say go and be an entrepreneur without the ecosystem that can really allow them to access. This is essentially what Silicon Valley is all about, right? It's that network. And so how do we create a global virtual Silicon Valley and a Pan-African one that can really allow us to unlock entrepreneurship, and that's what needs to happen.
Yeah, one element I'd say is I point to the example of actually I was telling because I actually make the connection between this very similar characteristics between New Zealand, Israel, and Chile, because each of them is sort of a boxed economy for a variety of reasons. But the one thing that actually is true about the Israeli economy is that there are certain capabilities. There's certain industry areas that they're very, very good at. They're very, very good at security. They're very, very good at a lot of the basic research around chip technologies and so on. And I think that's also something that's really important, is to have the kind of collaborative ecosystem within Ethiopia as an economy where there's a continuous process of saying, what's our differentiation? What are we going to continue to be good at? What are we better? You don't want to recreate Silicon Valley. There's a fill in the blank Silicon example in around the world in tons of ecosystems that have each sort of each built their own uniqueness and differentiation. But that differentiation is critical, because what ends up happening when you start to unbundle these markets, when you have talent markets that are global, when you have entrepreneurial ecosystems and investment markets that are global, now the competition is also amped up as well. And so it wants to know, what are you good at? Like, what are you going to be better at than anybody else? And that will attract the capital far more effectively if it believes that there's really concerted effort to build that skill set.
Thanks both. Gary, I want to come to a question here that was raised in the chat box around, how do you suggest, or how would you recommend to tap into the talent of the diaspora, right? Have you seen any trends or lessons learned from other similar geographies or economies to Ethiopia?
Yeah, so a lot of it depends upon what you're looking for. So there's a variety of ways to think of that as a fabric of talent and resource, right? So some countries think of it solely as a source of remittances, and it's actually remittances are 6 to 7% of the GDP of Mexico, most of them in the United States. But increasingly, I think more and more people are understanding that it's an amazing talent pool. It's potentially an investment pool. So it's already, especially if the people that are generating reasonable incomes, it's some of the marketplaces, some of the ecosystems, the platforms that Fed was talking about that are about investors. That's one way to be able to leverage it, as potentially to be a source of capital. You can see them as potential trained talent that you want to have return. And so countries like China call them sea turtles. They go to another country to get training, go to college, whatever, build businesses. What's the incentive to have them come back? And so the incentives are often things that the government offers, which is going to be, basically, we're going to give you opportunity to be able to have cheap access to land or a facility. We're going to put some money into a startup that you do. We're going to make it easier for you to start a business. You can start it faster with less licensing hassles than other people do. If you create the incentives that bring that diaspora talent back into the country, then that actually is a ton of energy that you can be leveraging. But it takes a concerted set of programs.
Yeah, and I definitely want to actually kind of emphasize that point, Gary, because we also, especially here in Ethiopia, I think sometimes do not do a very good job at coming up with those concerted efforts, right? So I think, again, for those people who've been raising those questions around, how do we stay plugged in and how do we contribute to our country? I mean, the first thing I'd say is, unite. And, we have movements. I co-founded a movement, Ethiopians in Tech. We've been, the idea is to kind of stay also plugged in, I believe, into really what's going on, and also even come to the country, right, to really see what's going on.
And also, just really quickly, Bernard, also mentor networks. So one of the things that Martha was mentioning is that her sister started a company but didn't have access to mentor networks, and that's something that the diaspora can actually represent as well. That's one way to be able to support the ecosystem, the entrepreneurial ecosystem in the country, is bring those people in on remote platforms to be able to continually nurture and mentor startups and give them the support that they need so that you can actually scale that more effectively. Yeah,
no, definitely. So I want to also address here a question that came up. I think sometimes there's a misunderstanding around, those figures that at the JCC we talk about. I want to make sure that the audience understands that it's not just targets that we have in terms of jobs creation, but it's also just a pure requirement. So we know we've done the math in terms of the workforce that needs to be fed or that needs to be taken care of per year. And so when we come up with figures of 2 million and above, those are jobs that need to be created. It's not a target. It's more about this is the workforce that's coming into the job market that we need to cater to, right? I wanted to come back maybe to Joseph and see also if you have any further thoughts in terms of again, how do you kind of retain that talent through technology and through these digital platforms?
Yeah, I agree a lot.
Because there were some questions again, about the there was some questions about in the environment and infrastructure, and so I think the audience was interested also in how do you make sure that the infrastructure, the environment is kind of on par with what folks are looking for.
I agree a lot with what Fred and Gary mentioned about an ecosystem. Think of an ecosystem as a living thing. And kind of taking the nature analogy, an ecosystem is living when there are a lot of diverse types of bodies within it that are actively interacting. And that's hard to engineer from a top-down level. And one of the things that I see in different environments is, what are those physical places of high density where young, talented people who are driven can go to and meet with other young, talented people or whatever age and exchange ideas, startup weekends, just creating a lot of those heartbeats in different cities around Ethiopia. I think that is actually going to help you just keep a thriving engine, an ecosystem of people coming, connecting with each other. I think that's a really important part that gets missed. Governments and other places can quickly sort of over-engineer it from top down, but is really what happens at a grassroots level that is actually, creating those heartbeats of startup ecosystems. And I think that becomes its own attraction engine, for talent. But there was a question here as well about, how can you develop the entrepreneurial mindset when you're trying to feed yourself and you're trying to create income to survive? And that is real. We can sit here and talk about ecosystems and entrepreneurship from a super high level, but that's the real struggle that many people go through. And in one lens, scarcity actually brings even a deeper drive to be entrepreneurial and to create your own opportunity as opposed to wait for that opportunity to arrive at your doorstep. So some people might take that as a result of it. And also it goes to what Fred said, not everyone should be an entrepreneur because you're taking a lot of risk for your own well-being and also the well-being of all your employees. And that's a lot to take for individuals. And so, that hustler mentality that we have in Africa is actually a very important ingredient to be successful as entrepreneurs, and build online, you leverage online tools to access people. Like I'd be excited as a diaspora from Ethiopia to mentor Ethiopian entrepreneurs. I'm sure there are so many others who'd be interested to put time and energy to do so. So how do you actually, maybe from a government lens, you can build, whatever platform, whatever way to do so. But, I've had to be very resourceful. I've had to learn how to use LinkedIn on my own, how to reach out to people, do cold calls, reach out to 100 people and maybe 1 or 2 people respond to you, and that's part of the hard hustle that you got to take to make it and to really thrive as an entrepreneur.
Fantastic. So we have about, thanks for that, Joseph. We have about 4 minutes left here on this call. The last question I want to ask to each of you, and if you can maybe answer just in 1 minute, is, what really gets you excited about entrepreneurship and the future of jobs, specifically in Africa and I guess Ethiopia? So what really makes you enthused? And before I go to each of you, I do also want to thank the United Nations Development Program who's been supporting us on this initiative. And I also want to recognize the presence of our commissioner. So it's not just, MMCY who's late awake at night here, but it's also our commissioner who's really, thinking about all these challenges day and night. And he also wants to thank each and every one of you, Joseph, Gary, and Fred for being on this call. And so I'll go to Gary first and ask you, what kind of gets you excited, for our continent here and maybe Ethiopia that you kind of know?
So I think more than anything, it's the seeing the energy around defining your own destiny. That is absolutely the most critical thing, is that everybody feels that they are part of a process of trying to build the kind of economy and society that they want. I mean, that is really what's exciting, is to see that I think we've seen a lot of models. We've talked about a lot of places in the world that you can leverage the insights from. But what it really takes is the people in the streets, the people that want to have this future to co-create it together. And I really see a tremendous amount of that energy gelling in Ethiopia and throughout the African continent.
Thanks, Gary. Fred, any parting thoughts?
Yeah, really that, addressing the challenge of jobs for the young people of Africa is the central challenge of the world for this century, because we're going to be 40% of the world's population by the end of this century as Africans. And so this is the African century, whether we like it or not, because where Africa goes this year is where the world will go. So the only question is it going to be a bad century or a good century? And so I think that, but it is going to be the African century. So what we need to do is to really every single government needs to take this as the highest priority. In order for political stability to happen and economic growth, we have the largest pool of untapped talent in the world. And, I think that, it's very exciting to be part of this, the ecosystem is trying to do something about this, but we need so many other players to put this front and center. And I think that not only Africa is going to benefit, but the whole world will benefit from a more prosperous continent. And so, let's really take this more seriously. Thanks.
Thanks, Fred. Joseph?
So I believe in the spirit of entrepreneurship, because that's how you solve real problems. And Africa has a lot of problems. Ethiopia has a lot of problems. So the best solutions, in my view, are going to come from the entrepreneurs working in the grassroots and doing that. And I guess the last thought from my side is, when I grew up in Ethiopia, we have had this culture, I don't know if it's still there, that we always wanted to be like someone else, like this other country, or, there's that underlying sense. And you'll always lose when you're trying to be like something else, because you don't have the full context and understanding and background of that. And I think the more Ethiopia tries to be itself and be successful in its own way, and Africa be successful in its own way, I think we'll have a much better future for ourselves. And, in Ethiopia, the young population has, traditionally been seen as a challenge. Oh, wow, that's a lot of mouths to feed. That's a lot of unemployed young people who don't have much to do. But if you zoom out, actually, as a huge part of the Western world's population is declining over time, the African population is increasing. And that's actually a huge part of our opportunity for us to create. And so It's yes, job creation for a lot of young people, but the nature of jobs is changing, and everything is becoming so decentralized right now. So it's really for ourselves to write our own story, and leveraging what the world has right now, and that brings a level of discomfort, but actually that's where you can be really successful in your own way and do unique things, as opposed to trying to copy someone else.
I couldn't agree with you more, Yosef, and this is really I think the words that we needed for the end of this session. I think, our former prime minister used to say, each individual in this country, even though we have a lot of mouth to feed, each person comes with one mouth, but two hands, right? And for me, that's what really gets me excited, is that we have really a very youthful population that comes with new ideas. I feel like a dinosaur, actually, nowadays when I walk around in the streets. And so people come up with new ideas. I think some of you said that, we don't even know what's coming ahead. So the idea is to kind of stay nimble, right? And so I can see the agility all around me, and that's what really gets me excited. So again, I think our commissioner just thanked you all. I want to also thank you all, Gary, Yosef, Fred, and I hope that we will see you in Addis Ababa here in a few months, so that we can actually huddle around a table with Injera, so that we can further discuss about the future jobs in Africa, in Ethiopia. And we'll finish this session with the video again, so that we want to make sure everyone use it for one last time. Thank you all.
NCOPA is the movement of Ethiopian entrepreneurs and innovators. A network of daring entrepreneurs transforming the way we live, work, and play. An emerging hub with best-in-class facilities, built by the best-in-class. NCOPA is where culture meets creativity, where inspiration meets disruptive innovation, and where bold ideas and big dreams yield unique solutions. NCOPA is connecting Ethiopia to Africa and Africa to the world. We're learning and adapting fast. And you can join a growing community of founders, investors, and world builders reimagining the future. Together, let's embark on an adventure to start up, scale up, and shake up the African entrepreneurship ecosystem. NCOPA is for Ethiopian entrepreneurship at work.
Thank you, everyone.